Morning, everybody. Happy July. Hope everybody is doing well. And we got through the first couple heat waves, and now we got a mini one coming. And hope nobody was affected by the weird Microsoft bug last week that crashed half of the stuff in the world. We were not affected, of course, but hopefully nobody else had to deal with it too much. So today we are talking about entities and public access for them. We've talked about entities before, but it never hurts to go over things again. And there was a couple updates made a while back to the public access portion of this that may affect some of what you're working on. I'm going to go into the sandbox and the Fairfield system as usual. And there we go. Okay, a little random funny thing for a second. This is my random picture that's showing up on my Fairfield system today. This was in one of the exhibits, and it was showing hairnets in the World War II era in factories and stuff like that. My director hated this, hated that random foam head and all of that. One day my curator and I finally snuck in and just took it out because it would drive him crazy. Every single time he walked by, he'd be like, this is pretty bad. Can we get rid of this? So I think it's hysterical. I forgot I took a picture of it like this for the hairnet. Anyway, this is completely irrelevant to what we're talking about. Let me go into the public portal as well. Looking at some things. So one of the main questions when we were working on the portal is, in redoing it this last year, was how to have entities display. So entities being any people or businesses that are related to your collections. So some systems call them constituents. I am not sure what Past Perfect calls them, but it's just any person or business related to your system or your collections in any way. And you can create them as either or, depending on what you need. So those are currently the only two choices. I'm not opposed to at some point adding more if we want to do like family group or something like that, but it's not anything that's been reviewed and talked about yet. But if anybody ever has any options that they want to explore, let me know and I can add it to the list to maybe institute someday when we do a big update. So when you go into your entity records, you're going to see, oh, this is a good guy. The usual information about forename, surname, a little note about the surname part, because you will also see that same thing sometimes with businesses. Oh, you have organization for here, but you'll get some like family businesses or things like that with the entities. And if you want to put a more businessy or organizational name, just put it in the surname. If you're not making them a full business record, or if it's like an alternate name or something, because that way it'll alphabetize properly under like a surname overview thing. It used to say surname / corporate name or something like that, and that went away. And I just never think to have that added back in. So if you have like a multiple name thing that is still being put in as an individual, make sure you're putting the whole name under surname, because otherwise it will parse it out itself. Sometimes it'll be for things like photography studios. I've had that because it's, a particular guy's photography studio, and we're more interested about tracking him as kind of an individual versus as a business entity. So it'd be like D'Angelo's photography or something like that. You want to put that whole thing under surname. And then you could do alternate names for the actual guy if you wanted, or whatever, just as an example. So all of the information here, any of the stuff that you want, the spot for, was it not on here? It may not be in here. Let me go to Fairfield for a second and just look at some of our people. I'm just doing an everything search with the asterisk. and just pulling up kind of the whole list of whoever I've got. I'm skipping over all the problematic people because I'm just looking at it and there's all those people at the top are problematic that I'm still working on. I will work on this guy. So as you go down and you're at the very bottom, you're accessible to the public and not accessible to the public for all the information. Very important to remember in general for everybody, no matter, or if you make them public access, you will never see any contact information. You won't see addresses or phone numbers or anything else like that put up into the system. When you get somebody in as public access, I'm going to use my good friend Mary Fish-Silliman because I know her records fuller. So she's been made public access, and so she's associated with this image as she's the subject. We don't break it down into subject, but just associated with, covers a whole variety of things. Also, her artist, Ruben Moulthrop, is public access, so we will see him here. So if we click on her, this is what we'll see for her record specifically. We'll get her life dates and her little bio over here. You will not see, again, contact information, anything else like that that's put into the record. As with anything, you will never see notes in the system that are put in. Notes are never made public access. So you can put whatever information, internal or whatever you want here. I'm very specifically mentioning that because, let me click on her artist for a second. So Ruben Moulthrop, we've got him in here, and he is just got a very minimal bio. He's got a much more extensive bio. We've just not filled that in. Now, there was a lot of concern when we first did the redo and the upgrade to this over who could be made public access and who wouldn't. Even just to mention their names, donor names are never made public access as being directly related to the object. They are, of course, if you put them in as a credit line, gift of Sue Smith, you know, that will be there. But you would not be able to go in and click on Sue Smith as a donor. She wouldn't show up as donated by Sue Smith. Just whatever's in the credit line. So if you ever had something that was gift of an anonymous donor, for instance, you wouldn't see that that was her. So that does not ever show up either. We usually just put up associated with and created by. I don't believe previously owned by comes up or owned by comes up, which is kind of a hassle when it comes to historic items that you want to trace back through the family, but that's something that you could put into a description or something like that anyway, if you really wanted to track that history without having the people show up. It kind of became a question. I mean, generally from a history museum overall background, for me, that was like, well, why wouldn't you want that? And then I had a couple art museums, and I'm sure Charlotte, you can identify with this. You don't necessarily want to know you might want to know who's previously owned a picture, but you don't necessarily want the world to know who's owned something. That gets a little bit hairy. So it was for the overall good for everybody. We are not doing that. So if that's something that you need to put that into your own system. And it doesn't really show up on the public view. So if it's important that you know this quilt was handed down from Sue Smith to Mary Smith to Debbie Smith to whatever, that's something you would need to put in public access description or curatorial or something like that if you needed the public to know that. Okay, so what I'm trying to get around to is the fact that if you want anybody to show up as a maker or associated with your item, you need to make them public access. So some of you may have already realized the problem with that is if you make them public access, their biography will show up like it does for these guys. And if you have somebody that is let's say, and this did come up, again, this is the main reason for all of this, is a lot of modern artist issues. that they are a current artist. You want to say that this painting was made by them, but you don't necessarily want to know that they were the former owner, creator, whatever. And you don't necessarily need to know any specific biography information that you might be tracking in your system, and not necessarily public access. My old museum that I was at, we went about it as far as deciding who became public access. I always went with people who were more than 100 years, who were dead for more than 100 years, could be public access. That was fine, especially because for things like the biography, I would tend to put, Mary Fish Silliman, like this, daughter of Reverend Joseph and Rebecca, was born on this date and all this stuff, and I would track her family. So she's been dead for more than 100 years. That's fine. If it's somebody that I wanted to track that information, but they're still alive, you don't necessarily want that to be published in their bio online, but they're still an artist, so you need them to show up as the creator. So one thing that we've done with this is, rather than, and it's kind of a hassle, and I wish there was a better way to do it, but it becomes a little bit too complex for the database to do without risk of error in a way. So it's better to tell everybody as you're going through your records, if you don't want anybody to know this biographical information about somebody, then put it in your notes fields. And I would actually, one of the things I do with notes, and this is just my own workflow thing, is I label my notes. It makes it easier to see. And this is just something that you can, say someday I do want to make Joseph U. House public access, and I do want his bio. I can just edit it and it's fine. But you can take his whole bio and just put it down there. So you have that information, that's the biography note. But if you make him public access, the only thing that will show up is his life dates. If there's a reason for people not wanting to make life dates public access, you can always put that in the biographies or in the notes as well. For the most part, if they're still alive, I'm most likely not going to make them public access, but then that gets into the whole current living artist issue. So that's something you can always just say as a rule of thumb, that you're always going to say this person was born on this date and leave that all down there versus leaving anything in the notes. I was going to say the general rule of thumb at my old museum was, if information could be easily found on the web, there's no reason why we can't put it on there. So say this guy was an artist, and he was a living artist, there's no reason why I couldn't just say born 1921 and just leave it at that, because if I Googled somebody as an artist, you're going to get all that information anyway. So I am still pro following that for my own collection. If I can Google somebody and find out all that information, there's no reason I can't put that on and make it public on our system. And I don't know if we even have his dates on there. I don't know if I know who I have. I can't even think of anybody that I've got as a living artist in my collection necessarily. I know there's a couple. I don't know if this is public. No, it is not. Like I've got a piece by photographer. Yes, leave, it's okay. I've got this piece in my collection that is a day to night photograph. He's a well-known photographer and does these kind of works all over the country and the world, actually. I don't currently have him as public access, but honestly, there's no reason why I shouldn't. Actually, I don't think the whole thing is. But what I would do is not put the life dates in for him now, unless he's, easily findable. It's kind of a coming out. See, he shows up right away. So anything, and I have actually done, copied a little bio from online, especially if they have their own bio on their own site. I will copy that and put it in biography. So that is easily accessible anyway. And I'll usually make a note that it was taken from this website. and note it for ourselves. So there's no reason why I can't take his biography from here. I would edit it down dramatically. But he's from Westport. I would take that and I could put it into our bio and have it show up and it would be fine. So I think basically the takeaway for a lot of this is to, and something you should think about anyway, when you're putting in, especially creators, do you want them to be public access, and create a rule of thumb for your own institution about how you want to handle it. I just saw the chat thing. Joanne, that is an excellent question. And right now you cannot put an image with an entity. That's on the request list and has been for a while. And we've had other things come up that we have not been able to get to yet. So it's still on the list. Joanne asked, how do you associate an image with an entity? It's possible in the system to make it do that. We just currently do not. And that's one of those overall will affect everybody kind of thing, and affect space and all that. If somebody decides are fine putting just like really small limited JPEGs in with somebody, that's fine. We're concerned that there would be a lot of space being used. So somebody would want to put 200 images of an entity with that person. So it's kind of needs to be discussed by the advisory committee at some point, because we have a lot of things to go down and just see if we think that would be useful for everybody or not. I personally like having an image for an entity. In some instances, it comes in really, really handy, depending on the people. I don't necessarily need to do it for every single person in my system, but it does come in very useful a lot of the time. So it's still on the list of things to go through and consider for any future updates. Oh yeah, so my guy here, I would probably do a modified bio from that other page, put him here and make him public access. So then I can go through and make this public access and it'll be visible for there. We had originally, I think I started to say, wanted to just be able to put the creator's name with everything and not make them public access at all, but just have the name show up. But then that got complicated as well. So we made the decision to go ahead and just make everything, they had to be public or not. So if you want them recognized, even just for their name to show up without any of the other information, you have to make them public access. Actually, let me go back to my overall search. The other thing that I wanted to mention too with the entities, because I'm pretty sure a lot of you all know this already, but I was going to repeat some of the things just for either new folks in case you didn't, or for any new users that are coming on as well. They're going to be watching this later. So when you're going in and putting your people in, and especially if you've done a migration, your names are very possibly going to be kind of all over the place. The system does pretty well if you just enter a display name. It does pretty well at parsing out forename, middle name, and surname, although very often it will mix the middle name with the forename. So it's something that's good to go through and check your entities as you've got them, and are going through, especially with the new migration, to tweak things as they go. Our entities in Fairfield were all over the place because we did not have an authority person field for that. It was just a free text field, so you could put in whatever you wanted to, and it was all over the place. I tried to do a lot of cleaning up before we did our migration, but I was new at the museum at the time, so I didn't know who anybody was. And I've also made the recommendation to a lot of folks now that are doing the migrations that have kind of messy entities, that I would love to help you and I could walk you through some of the cleanup and I can walk you through some of the methods, but I don't know your people. So I don't want to risk messing anybody up. So once you're in and working on your own data in the system, it's much easier to fix everybody. So the goal is that you will have one entity record for a person, whether they have 30 names or not. You can put in alternate names, you can put in other information there, but rather than have 10 different instances of somebody's name, you can have one and it'll all lead back to the same person. And actually I can do, Mary Fish is such a great example for a lot of things, partially because she was married 8 million times. So wherever you get her name from, if you're looking her up, it depends on what point in her life that you may have the reference to. So you want to look her up and still get to that same person. So and she had one more name after this, I'm pretty sure too, but for argument's sake, for her display name, I think we left it at where her portrait was done. So alternate names for her. So when you're adding on, yeah, we've got a bunch. There should be one more actually, I think. So this is an alternate name. That might have been her first name. So her maiden name was it Mary Fish Noyes? That was just Mary Fish. I need to look at her. Then she was Mary Fish Noyes Silliman, and then I think her final was Mary Fish Noyes Silliman Dickinson. So you have the option to put in what type of name it is, if it's a married name, birth name, things like that. The other good one that's in here is used for, and that's something that necessarily won't show up, but if you search on it, it'll pop up as your name, as that person's name. And I actually have, let me go to me too, because I'll show you what I did. I've been working on tracking some of our stuff at our offsite storage because we just moved it again in the fall. So I've been putting in the location field in that inventory field. I've been putting my name and the date that I've seen it. So I know that it exists and that it's there. So I may not be changing the location because it just is an offsite location, but I do want to note that yes, it does exist. I have seen it. So one thing that I did do is for my, I did a use for name of just my initials. So when I go in and do a inventory notation, and this is just like a cheaty workflow kind of thing. So if I go down to add inventory entry, instead of typing out my whole name, if I just put in DL, my name comes up. So it's a lot easier. And this is a short name. This is shorter than my maiden name. So it's a really short name, but still, it's a lot easier than typing in my whole name every single time. So that's kind of a good use for that use for option. And it won't show up in any of the views, I don't think. I haven't tweaked that one, but when I think, oh, you know what? And I've put myself in, I think I put myself in the sandbox. That's not a weird order. Oh yeah, I was using myself as an example as well in the sandbox for different types of names. Other things you can do too is more so for, and this is all internal information, the effective date does not go out to the public. I look at the effective date as when this name occurred. So like if I wanted to say that the effective date of the married name is the date we got married, I could put that there. So that would be like, okay, now it's this name. This actually, as I'm thinking about it, and I need to go back and do this, comes in very handy for a problematic couple that I have in the collection. And I don't know if they're in here. They're not. That because we don't like to actually give women's names, they're usually just Mrs., let's say Frederick. So I've got this group of the Lack family. I've got Ethel S. Lack, Harriet Colgate Abbey Lack, Frederick R. Lack, Harriet Colgate Abbey Lack again, and Mr. and Mrs. Frederick Lack. As I went in to start doing cleanup, there's a multitude of objects in the collection in our instance that are from Mr. and Mrs. Frederick Lack. First of all, I always recommend to people that I would not create a single entity of a Mr. and Mrs. for many different reasons. I highly recommend splitting them up into two different entities. So you would have Mr. Frederick Lack, and then until you figure out who she is, you would have Mrs. Frederick Lack. That way she has her own track, especially in this instance. And I use them for many different reasons, partially because I'm fairly certain a lot of groups have this same issue come up, the way that everybody's records are kept. So Mr. and Mrs. Frederick Lack gave us a lot of stuff. And at one point gave us a lot of stuff that was owned by Mrs. Frederick Lack. Okay, great. Then it starts turning into, and I thought I might have fixed it. Then it turns into gift of Mr. Frederick Lack and daughter. Just daughter, no name, just daughter. It goes above and beyond the Mrs. Frederick thing. Like we're just, the fact that they said she was a daughter, I suppose, is probably good. So I started to do some research at some point when I was working on some of these records, and I went and looked, and I'm like, oh, Frederick was married twice. That's nice. But all of the gifts throughout the whole entire thing, thank you for appreciating it and laughing, Jada. All of the gifts were all Mr. and Mrs. Frederick Lack. Didn't matter which wife it was. It was always Mr. and Mrs. Frederick Lack. But it matters to me which wife it was, because some of the stuff were owned by Mrs. Frederick Lack, but I didn't know which Mrs. Frederick Lack. So I had to go through and figure out who his wives were, where they were, which died when. It's, yeah, to figure out whose things they actually belong to. Especially because one of them, his first wife, I think, has a pretty like far back family history in the state and in the town. So there's a lot of like nice historic items that are like, that go back with some good history, that it helps us know who they are. So what I did end up finding is, I believe, so Harriet Colgate Abbey Lack was the first wife. And then they named their daughter Harriet Colgate Abbey Lack because they want to make me insane. So yeah. So then the second wife was Ethel S. Lack. So now I can try to parse out, I've got a little chart on my desktop on my laptop at work that just has like the death and birth dates of everybody. I can do it here. And I probably should, especially with the Harriets, but yeah, just to make it quick and easy, but to figure out who was married when. So this is especially one of the reasons why I always say to kind of split up these guys. Let me see who I still have that are one related object to this. Okay, pieced quilt. I don't know if I have a provenance with it, but it was given by them. So most likely, just looking at this, it was probably the first wife, but I don't know. So I need to go back and figure that out. Let me see. I've got provenance in here at all yet. Oh yeah, no, this is one of our sketchy records that we're like, I don't know. And I've been piecing it together. Let me go back to the Lacks. Oh, the Lack family. I have a whole folder on them actually, just to try to straighten that ridiculousness out. But yet again, another reason to do a little genealogy research and figure out, see if you can figure out who the first person is. Find somebody in your institution, whoever's your genealogy expert and your researcher, and if you guys have ancestry, just do a little poking around and see if you can figure it out. Or most public libraries, or a lot of public libraries, have ancestry access as well. So if you have to pop with a library and do a little research, it doesn't hurt either to try to figure that out. So one thing that actually ended up being really useful in doing a lot of cleanup on this is you can merge people on the system. I'm going to go back to the sandbox because I know there's still a lot of wonky people in here that are duplicate names and things. Objects, I want entities. And I'm going to look at my display options. Just briefly, as some of you know, you can do a custom display for your results and have them different fields show up however you want in whatever order you want to. I think we already did display office hours. I don't know if we did that this year. There is one kicking around. So I'm going to click on the little gear. Some people call it a pickle. I'm sticking with gear and putting in, I just want first last name sort on this. So it'll give you the entity name and the alternate names just for kicks. And then you can also always on here, change your sorting up on the top, which sometimes I forget about until I go into the record and go, I didn't want to do that. You can have it sort on the display name, the forename, the gender. I have it sorting on for that. Life dates, things like that. I like surname, forename, because that gives you that alphabetical by last name. Even though I don't have it displaying that way, it comes up alphabetically like this. And these guys are probably a little screwy because I'm in the sandbox. So you're like, why does this show up first in the entity names? So let's take a look at these guys for a second. So the way it comes up, the way it's sorted into the system, and this is again the kind of junk data being uploaded into the sandbox for trial and error, but this is actually how it was uploaded into our system, because I didn't know who these people were and I wasn't going to mess with anything before I went in there. So sisters somehow got into the surname, so that messes up the sort. So you've got two people. And honestly, for something like this, if you're working in your own system, what I would actually do is duplicate this record, and then you can change their names and make one and the other at the same time. So if you duplicate that, and we're going to remember that it was Sherman Child. I wonder if I can search on sisters. So we're going to duplicate that. It'll come up with its own entity identifier. So you'll see here in the individual way down at the end, it kind of goes off the end. It does say duplicate on here, so you know this is the second record. But I'm going to go and just for kicks, search Sherman Child. So now I've got both of these. So if I pull up the full results from this, I'm now going to, and so doing it with the duplication, you're still going to have them related to the same object that they were before. This is kind of just a case for like something like this, where you've got a Mr. and Mrs. or a sisters or something like that. There's a couple different ways to go about this. So for her, this is our first one. I'm going to keep her as Mrs. Sherman Child. So I am going to get rid of all of that, and then put child in her last name. And then her display name is just going to be Mrs. Sherman Child. So now when I save this, we've just got her, but she's still related to that object. One thing I do also, and this is my own little weird workflow quirk, and it's kind of in theory to save my work later on, I tend to follow what my previous museum did. And for the most part, I will make somebody's main name their maiden name. It really depends. This is something that's good for you to discuss in your institution, what shows up as the display name versus what is just an alternate name. I kind of tend to do it by how we know that person, like with the most recognizable name. My old museum always did maiden name no matter what, which could get a little confusing. So this is why I do waffle a bit, which isn't good for consistency, but you'd have this option of the alternate names. So what I do a lot of the time is I will, even though Mrs. Sherman Child is the main name, I add it in as an alternate married name. So if I ever find out who she is, I can just go in and all I have to tweak is that first one. Because even if I don't change it fully to her maiden name, I would change it to like Mrs. Bethany Child or something. But that way I don't have to fix it. So I'm going to do Mrs. Sherman Child. I'm going to do married name and then save that. And I'm doing it this way for a reason. Okay, so sometimes the Mrs. does not pop into the prefix. Most of the time it does, but definitely go back and check. So now she's in as Mrs. Sherman Child. That's her alternate name as well. So if I go back and find out that she's Susie Child, I can change that and it'll update, and I won't have to go back and put his name in there, because we do still want that. We want to be able to find it, because the majority of my records is Mrs. his name, last name. So now the other one we want to do is her sister, Mrs. E.B. Goes. So we're going to just get rid of this. I'm going to cut and paste. Not that I can't type it. I'm also going to move this EB over to the middle name. And then get rid of that. Get rid of the sister's duplicate. Actually, I do want that as the display name. So we're going to save that and see, make sure it saves properly. Yep, that's fine. Everything's where it's supposed to be. And just thought of something else with her. Oh, and you can relate them to each other. So you can relate entities to each other. And it's a very just straight entity to entity relationship. There's no, this is not where we track mothers, fathers, grandfathers, siblings, ancestors, and everything. That's up to you to put in a notes or a biography thing. So we are going to put in relationships and add entity. What was her name? Entity Sherman Child. Okay. So we're just going to put Sherman Child, start typing that. And yep, Mrs. Sherman Child comes up. Awesome. So we're going to save that. And then if we wanted to, in the basic info notes, we'd say sister of Mrs. E.B. Goes. So the relationship will be on both sides when you do it, but you would have to make a note of any notes you have to make on your own. So if we go back into relationships and we click on Mrs. Sherman Child and we look at her relationships, you're going to see Mrs. E.B. Goes shows up there. But this is also where you now want to make a note so that note doesn't transfer. That you have to do by hand. So now these guys are all set. That's a good way to split up pairs without losing the data and without having to put everything back. The other thing to do is, I told somebody the other day I was doing the demo, it might have been you, Jody, that I needed to repopulate this with some of the bad names because I've done so much cleanup. Yeah, I had like 10 Cyrus Sherwood Bradleys, and I've done so much cleanup as a demo, I only have one left.
Feel free to use anything from the Crandall collection, because there's a boatload of weird things going on there. Oh yeah.
Oh, you know, I probably can.
Yeah.
I'll pull your old
Yeah, pull the old stuff.
And your old data.
Oh, there's all kinds of wacky stuff in there that
you have volunteered.
Yes, I volunteered. I'm working on it, but it's not ready. It's not done yet.
And I've seen some of it, and it's wacky, and it's
oh yeah,
excellent practice.
There you go.
Who have I got? I know I have some that are right near the top, I thought. Oh yeah, my buddy, Eben Burr. Now this also gets confusing and why I never want to clean up other people's data. We have more than one W. Eben Burr in my collection. So it gets, you have to figure out, make sure you're on the right guy and not getting rid of the same guys. One of the things that my old librarian did, especially with this, and I kind of did it with Bugs Bunny as a demo, is she just put their birth year in their display name as well. So if you have a couple different people and you know that one of them's born in 1901 and the other one's born in 1965, you can quick at a glance look at it and see who it was without having to actually go into the record. I don't think I have any here. see, this is good data to practice on and clean up. I don't know if any of the Evans are like this in here. Entities. Oop. I don't want that. I want that works. First, last list. Oh, surname, forename, perfect. Yeah, so I've got an Evan Burr in 1798, and there's W. Evan Burr in 1901. So that's one that's good to try to track and keep up and figure out which one is which. So if you go into Evan's record, she just put that little 1978 there. His birth dates are still there, and we didn't do a whole birthday. We wanted it just a little bit more straightforward. So she did that, and it has actually come in very, very useful. And I have no idea why we spelled his name Ebenezer, because I'm pretty sure that's wrong. But I'll make a note to fix him. But it could be right. I don't know. I'm going to go check before I do that. Let me go to, oh, Sandbox is where I was going. Let me go back one to Evan. For any of you who have not done some fun cleanup yet. So I have already, and I've also named, labeled them too, and Jody has done this and it has worked well, I think, is if I find one record that I want to keep, I just temporarily change the display name and put a keep on the end of it. So when I have a list, I know which one I'm transferring everything to. So if I'm on my W. Evan Burrs, this guy's got 7 related objects. This guy doesn't have any. I don't know that he's related to anything, but we don't want him because he's the same one. All you're going to do, and this is, always be careful when you're deleting, because once you delete, it's gone. So just don't do it when you're half asleep or in a rush, like hold off on it. It's pretty straightforward, and you kind of, the system makes it hard for you to mess it up, but just in case. So delete, you have an option. System will say, ooh, do you really want to delete this person? It's referenced one time. So when you want to delete this person, do you want to remove all references and make them not exist anywhere? Or do you want to transfer references and transfer the metadata? We do want to transfer the references to somebody else. We want that W. Evan that we want to keep. So start typing, the system will come up, and we want to stay with this keep one. And deleting that. And then it'll show up and just go back to your regular list. So now anything that was related to that other one is now related to that main one that you're keeping, without a lot of cutting and pasting and moving and trying to make sure that everybody's right and all that. The other option when you're looking at some of this too and trying to figure things out is to go to the waffle up here, even if you've got a couple that you're not sure about, that you may need to copy into something else. So if you decided that, where's my keep guy? He's here. That you wanted to say, oh, wait, no, I actually meant to keep this guy, 6.5 dozen, but you want this donor 45, you can copy this from here and put it into entity names here without having to go in and out of records 8 million times, and save that. So now this W. Evan Burr guy and this W. Evan Burr guy has that donor 45 on there, whatever that means. But just kind of as an example, if you want to change names around and just do a bunch in bulk, you can do this in the waffle editing. If you have not used the waffle editing, feel free to go in and look at the office hours we did on it, and we'll give you a little bit more information on it. As I'm looking, like, now there's even more people. I don't think you can delete from here. I don't know. So if there's a field that has more information, like that names one, you'll see that little edit box. So if you clicked into that box, it'll pull up that whole like subset of the name with all the little individual fields, as opposed to just like a free text field. Actually, this should pull up with the option. As opposed to just like a free text field for this. Like entity name, it apparently lets us just type in whatever, because that's coming from the display name. This one, I don't know if it, yeah, I don't know why it comes up with the entity identifier. You can change that, but it's usually a system generated number. So I just let the system continue to generate it and don't worry about it. This basically auto saves. I do usually hit the enter key at the end if it's a free text field, just in case, and you sometimes get a little quick save up at the top. But then when you're done, you can just close it and it'll go back to, in theory, it'll go back to the regular thing. I haven't had this do this. Sometimes it won't, and it'll just do this. And you may have to go back out and go back in again. But it usually will still save. Double check what you're doing. Oh yeah, because here we go. Metadata merged between these two people, transferred one relationship. This other, it'll give you still the summary of what you just did. Does anybody have any questions on entities or the public access thing that we now have to pay attention to, or anything like that, or anything else? Oops, somebody put something in the chat. Hold on. Charlie, is there a way to merge entities, or you just have to delete one and transfer to the other? Yes, merge them like that and they'll bunch together. So it's much easier to do that merge, and that you won't see the words merge necessarily. It'll just say transfer data, like you did in the other thing. Yeah, like Evan, there won't be like a merge option. It sounds scarier because it's delete and you're just saying transfer references to, but the system will transfer all the data because you have this also transfer metadata off. So when you delete him, it'll go back in. It's also handy because it'll tell you how many times somebody's referenced in something. So even if it's somebody that you're not sure, and you're like, I don't see how they're related to anything, it'll tell you in that, oh, it's referenced 1 time, it's referenced 5 times. It'll tell you how it's referenced somewhere. So you can go check them. But that's the much easier way of doing name cleanup and duplicate cleanup and all that. Entities are not automatically, they're not automatically displayed when an object is made public. You have to make that entity record itself public access. So Joanne just wanted to know, are entities automatically displayed when an object is made public? You have to make that entity record public as well. They do not automatically come up. If you, yeah, no, that's just the easiest way to put it. Bye, Charlotte. Thanks. We'll see you. So yeah, it's much like if you're putting up pictures of things attached to records, you have to make each individual media file public to have it show up. Even if the overall record is public, but you haven't made those media files public, they won't show up automatically. It just gives you a little extra control over stuff. So you make sure that you have been able to go in and review the data, make sure you have what you want in there, and that you're not putting up stuff that you don't want there that you may not have noticed. It makes you like click on that button. So it makes you think about whether you want it or not. Yeah. Anybody have any other questions you can think of on this or anything else at the moment?
I have a quick question for you, Dan.
Yeah, of course.
Similar, not having to do with deleting or anything like that, but how you can kind of tag a person in your object record. You know, it could be like created by, donated by. I'm finding a lot of them, whoever did this before me put is related to instead of like is associated with.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming like is related to is a little bit more for like the sisters, the, you know, those kind of more familiar relationships versus like this book is kind of, it talks about this particular person in there. So it's more of an association. Is that a best way to kind of?
Is it coming up on this list here or is it showing up somewhere else?
Yep. Like under related entities. Yeah.
Oh, under related.
Well, in your object record. Yeah. In your object record where you're at right now.
Yeah.
And you're under related entities. Like there's a book and it has, you know, it might be talking about 4 or 5 different, like it's a biography of somebody, but like in Prudence Crandall. So it's talking about Andrew Judson. It's talking about Samuel May, you know, all these different people they've tagged.
Yeah.
is the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
Um, and then under that little drop down, they've put is related to.
Oh, did
Um,
they add
y-
that?
yeah, they related that. So
Oh,
that's
okay.
one of the options is related to, at least in my drop down. I don't see
Yeah.
it in your drop down.
Yeah,
Um,
that could be, give me a quick
yeah.
example and I'll take a look.
Well,
Um,
the one I'm looking at right now just happens to be deaccessioned, and so it's like it doesn't matter. But I'm like,
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sure there's other ones in there. So if I find one, I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, yeah, please.
but I'm thinking that it's like that is related to is definitely should be more of those relationships like family types versus this book talks about this particular person, which would be more of an association.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a different way of stating it. And I think
Yeah.
we went with associated with because we were thinking
Yeah.
more like related to. So it
Yeah.
kind of in this instance would mean the same thing. It's
Yeah.
related to this thing, associated with this thing somehow.
Right.
The problem with that is if somebody added that in
Okay.
after initial migration and everything, that's something
Oh.
that could break syncing to
Oh,
the
I don't know if
portal.
I don't know if that was related. I just know that it's in that drop down.
Yeah,
So
so if it's in the drop, yeah, so that's
yeah.
why send me that book and I'll double check it
Yeah.
because
Because you
if
could, if it's deaccessioned, you can still see it, right?
not if it's not public access. If it's public access, yes,
Okay. Oh, no, it's
I
not.
believe so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because Crandall stuff isn't up and running yet. I mean, we're
Okay.
up there, but we don't have any objects up there yet.
Okay.
I think we're still in the queue, but
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Send me and I'll double check
okay.
because this is one of the set options that
Okay.
there are set options in the overall part that pulls everything together and in the portal. So
Got it.
if that option's not in the portal, that it could mess up the syncing.
Okay.
So yeah, send me
Okay.
one for an example and then
I'll find one. I'll make one that's public, even though they're not up yet, and then I'll send it
yeah,
to you.
that's fine. Yeah,
Okay.
cool.
Cool. Thank you.
All right.